Death by 1,000 cuts is one of your great analogies for a narcissistic relationship. Because let's face it, we get worn down little by little, cut by cut. So what mind games can we start to look out for to prevent us from getting cut again and again?
So it's such an interesting question you're asking me, these mind games, right? By definition, Lisa, a mind game has this assumption that it's sort of intentional, right? And so I'm going to mess with you. I'm going to get you. And so the thing with a narcissistic person is the way they go through the world, just with everybody. It's not even like they're trying to get just you. And it's not even that like rub my hands together. It's just how they go through the world, right? So even gaslighting, the intentionality there isn't as much as you would think. Nobody's like, I'm going to gaslight her so she doesn't question where I was last night. I'm going to gaslight her so I can destabilize her. It's not that. The things that they do in narcissistic relationships, and everyone uses this word narcissistic abuse, right? That's the stuff that they do in a relationship, right? And that can include everything from devaluation and dismissiveness and minimizing things and manipulating and gaslighting and behaving in an entitled way, genuinely believing they're more special, or at least their behavior indicates that they think they're more special than anyone else. They're rageful and their rage is all over the map. They future fake. They will promise something they're going to do something so you stay in the relationship a little longer. You don't demand anything of them. They breadcrumb. They give you less and less and less stuff over time. There's a lot of betrayal in these relationships. And when you have betrayal and that goes alongside gaslighting, before long, you start feeling responsible for their betrayals. Like, well, maybe I wasn't paying enough attention to them, and maybe I wasn't this, and maybe I wasn't that. But because this stuff is mixed in with sometimes halfway decent days, that's where the confusion is. And a lot of narcissistic relationships start from something exciting and good, in the sense that it's the love bombing or the idealization or the intense interest. It's the charm, it's the charisma. Are these things being used tactically? I'm not convinced of that. And I think that's why these relationships are so tricky, that they want your supply and they're going to get your supply any way they want. And they're not even, and the thing is, all of these processes, they're not conscious of. But this is where the mind game thing becomes very interesting. They do know what they're doing is often wrong. And here's how it comes out. Because people often say, well, I don't know. If they don't know, then can we really be angry at them? I said, but they kind of do know. And how do we know they know? Because anyone out there who's had a narcissistic anyone in their life, usually a partner, but it could even be a parent or a sibling, they will behave differently in front of a group than they will with you individually, right? So the classical example, and I talk about it in the book, is they might call you and say, hey, how you doing? Yeah, good. Oh, you're in the car. You're on speaker? Like, what's going on? And they'll make a conversation. Once they determine, and if they, yeah, I'm on speaker, I'm driving. Oh, who's with you? No, nobody. I'm going to whatever. Then they'll go in because there's no audience to hear this.
Isn't that a mind game then? Because
that
they
is
know.
a mind game right there. That's a mind game. They don't want to look bad in front of other people. And if they think you're not going to leave them, which if you're in a long-term committed relationship, that's less likely because it's more disruptive, then they think you're kind of a sure thing of sorts. And so they can push that envelope, or they get bored. Narcissistic people get bored. They're novelty seeking, but it is kind of a mind game in the sense that the world might think they're cool. People who are close to them, whether it's their employees or the close family or their partner, think they're thinking, everyone thinks they're wonderful and I'm seeing the truth of this and it's not cool. But nobody believes them because everyone's like, but no, every time we interact with this person, they're great because they know how to play to people, like to an audience or to a group of people they don't see as often. That can feel like a mind game for sure. I think what's hard about these relationships, Lisa, is you've got two sets of rules. The narcissistic person is motivated by very different things than the other person in the relationship. So the other person in the relationship may be motivated by attachment, love, connection, closeness, all the things that make a person want to feel, I want to spend time with them, all of that. The narcissistic person is motivated by power, control, and dominance. Those are very different motivations, right? So by definition, these are asymmetric relationships. The narcissistic person has to be in the power position and the other person has to be diminished. And let's say you have two people that are kind of equally matched. They're in comparable jobs, they make the same amount of money, whatever. They may come in with that equivalence. So if you can't break down a person literally by having, I don't know, more money or more power in society or something, you'll break them down and destabilize them psychologically, and then you'll have the power. You own the reality. It's your narrative. How in touch a narcissistic person is with that, that's variable in terms of how much insight they have, but that's the mind game, if you want to call it that. But definitely the two masks, the public mask and the private mask, that's what makes narcissism so vexing for the people in these relationships. Because the example I would give is a person's at a dinner party, having a good time. And in fact, somebody even throws a few little critiques at the narcissist. And you're thinking, and you're dreading, oh my God, they're going to rage, but they don't. And they're like, oh, ha, 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 funny joke. And some people would say at that dinner party, they think, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm the problem because I always think he's too sensitive and he's going to blow up. Well, the dinner party's done. You get in the car. You're thinking, okay, it's not as bad as I thought. And they started on you because they were angry about that person critiquing them at the dinner party, but they weren't going to take it out on them. Some narcissists would. Don't get me wrong. It's a continuum. So some narcissistic people would have actually taken down that person at the dinner party, but in many cases they would have waited till they were in the car with you to go off on you.
Yeah, as you're talking, it really is all of these are manipulative tactics that are creating something that they're looking for.
Yeah.
So if they want to demean you because they want to get power over you, they can act in a certain way. You mentioned love bombing. So obviously that being a very tactical way of them drawing you in so they can shower you with admiration so that they can hook you. And I even heard you say that during the love bombing phase, like the worst thing you can do is say, I love you, because that's when they know that they have you hooked.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely have you hooked them, because once you do that, there's a lot of things that go along with I love you, right? It's almost like a license for them to say, I can probably get away with a lot more. I've got them. I've got the source of supply where I want it. The best analogy I can use is like a butterfly under glass. Butterfly can't get away. The beautiful thing is now captured under glass.
Yeah, so I'd love to go through your patterns that you talk about in your book, where you lay out these are the patterns that a narcissist will show, and I'd love to go down what they look like and then what you can do when you start to see them, so that hopefully if they're trying to play mind games with you, you've got a way to almost defend yourself and protect yourself. So you talk about the deprivation pattern.
Right. So the deprivation pattern is stuff like breadcrumbing, right? It's neglect. So narcissistic relationships often open up as very attentive, okay? So this person's lavishing attention, they're focused on you, they're texting you a lot. Many times people will feel very seen. In some cases, it's because this person's everything you want them to be, so they may not even be attentive, but you're so excited about this charming, charismatic, attractive person being interested in you, right? What happens over time, and this is where we see more of the devalue, discard phases of this relationship, is that it's absolute neglect. Like they don't listen, they withhold, they withdraw. And this concept of breadcrumbing is this idea that a person in a narcissistic relationship learns to get by on less and less. So, example I can give is that a person is in a relationship with somebody, there's just sort of less and less connectedness in the relationship. And it's the morning of their birthday, and the narcissistic person says, hey, happy birthday. And the person who's being breadcrumbed is getting nothing. It's like, oh my gosh, you remembered my birthday. And they get excited by someone simply waking up and saying happy birthday, as though they had done all these things for them. Another example of neglect could be something like Valentine's Day. So here's where breadcrumbing meets gaslighting. It could be the kind of thing where it's Valentine's Day and a person is like, oh, I want to do something romantic with my partner. And then the person says, well, maybe we could, like, it's Valentine's Day. Do you want to do something? And then the gaslight starts with, oh, really? You want me to go spend all this money and pay too much money for dinner? And the roses are going to cost more now? Like, what do you want from me? Are you like a gold digger? So now even that tiny little request, so if people push back on the neglect, the breadcrumbing, they get that whole gaslighted mess. But the breadcrumbed person gets excited by anything. Oh, they actually came home for dinner, or they're not playing golf today, yeah, because it's raining. But they're like, look, they're actually interested in me. And it's a way, the breadcrumbing is actually sort of a manifestation of trauma bonding. I'm going to justify this relationship. I mean, look, it really works. They said happy birthday to me. But the little things, these tiny crumbs that a person's using to kind of almost make the justification to stay because there's so little to work with. But I want to go back to something you said before. It's like, how do we push back on these? The problem is you don't. That's the struggle of these relationships. There's nothing you can do to defend yourself because no matter what you say, they're going to gaslight you. They're not listening and they will shut a person down. So it is more and this is where the death by 1,000 cuts, especially in the deprivation patterns, comes up because you've gotten over months, usually years, you've gotten used to getting so little from the relationship that it's almost like a person who's living under conditions of poverty and not having enough resources. And you get used to making all the ingredients stretch, to making the groceries stretch to the end of the month, to making the money last to the end of the month, even if it means you're not turning on the heat or whatever it is, you get used to living under those conditions, right? But it takes a toll on you. That's what we know about when people have to stretch like that. It takes a toll on people. So what is more interesting to me, Lisa, is can they push back? No, you can't. You just have to recognize this is not normal. But a lot of people, it's happening so gradually, they don't always recognize it. This is one of those times, though, where when you start looking at the lives of others. So, for example, let's say you look at someone's life on social media and you're like, that's not always real life, but you might say, this is very different than my life. This is where therapy becomes essential. Because when a person says to me this breadcrumb stuff, I will gently say, is that enough? Because that's not much. If all you're saying all they did this day was say happy birthday, I said, did they get you a card? Did they want to have dinner with you? And I've had people say, well, they said good morning. They said happy birthday to me that morning, but they did work late and they didn't come home. And I'm thinking, it's your birthday and they didn't come home to have dinner with you? And like they said they had to work really late. Well, when they came home, they're like, oh my gosh. And yeah, it was your birthday. And then they made me feel really bad because I was crying because it was my birthday and they didn't come home for dinner. And I'll say, oh, well, I guess you don't mind me working late when it buys you all the stuff that you need. And so then I felt really bad about myself. And you see how that shape shifts? So you bring it up, it gets worse.
So it's almost like you're starving, you get a little bite, and so you're like, well, it's better than starving. I may as well take the bite because it's better than nothing. And so you end up in a position of feast and famine. Well, it's not even really a feast.
There's never a feast. But the problem is that person then takes that bite and says, we live in plenty here. There's more than enough here. There's nothing there. I said, this is not enough. And I think, unfortunately, Lisa, a lot of what we're sort of taught in relationships, especially women, is, just make do. We have this very stoic sense of, cope and be strong in the face of it. And you're lucky you're in a relationship or some such nonsense. And so the people who are going through those deprivation patterns, they can really get into this sort of really bleak, lonely space where they also know that if they bring it up, this person is going to attack them. So it's getting them unwedged from that is really, really difficult because they will keep coming back to that one little breadcrumb and acting like it's a meal.
There's two more deprivation patterns that I've recently heard about that I'd never heard. I don't know if you've heard of them before, but one is benching. Have you heard being benched? So it basically means that somebody puts you on the bench. So it's like
they can pull you off when they need you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so they put you on the bench, but they don't want other people to have you.
Yes,
so they just put you on the bench. It was like the substitute just in case.
Yeah. And this becomes part of the whole hoovering dynamic too. Because what will happen is that the narcissistic person may want new supply. They may cheat on you or they may end it with you and immediately take up with someone else. But they want to keep you on ice, right? That's really what that benching is putting someone on ice. So ostensibly you're broken up, but they keep sending enough texts. They keep giving a person just enough to make them think, oh, maybe it's going to get better, or maybe we're going to do this, or thanks for giving me my space. And in the new year, this is going to happen and that's going to happen. But what they're doing is they're taking someone new on a test drive. So they really are putting someone on ice. And that's a very common narcissistic play.
Yeah. And the other one I've recently heard that's new is zombieing.
What is zombieing?
Zombieing is basically when you think the relationship is dead and then they come back from the dead.
So it's like they ghosted you, and then now they come back from the ghost.
Yeah, as if like, and then their reasoning and their excuse is like, oh my God, I've just missed you that much.
Yeah, and that's again, all of these are under the big banner of hoovering, right? Ghosting is a tricky behavior, Lisa, because some people ghost narcissists because they are so scared of them. They're like, I just want to cut this person out and not give them a way to reach me. And you can do that in the early phases of a relationship. So it's like this idea of all ghosting is bad is not really a thing. That actually ghosting can sometimes have its utility to it, depending on what the nature is of that other person. But this idea of kind of disappearing and then showing back up, like I said, it's not only a form of hoovering, it plays into that fantasy of being chosen. And that fantasy of being chosen is something that's a really terrible setup for narcissistic relationships, because it can play into this cycle of the only thing more seductive than being love bombed is being chosen after someone leaves you and says, I went out there and nothing's as good as you. That's a much bigger fantasy than being love bombed.
Oh, never thought about that like that.
And they're very good at that. Because what will happen too is it could very well be that the next person the narcissistic person meets doesn't want to put up with their nonsense.
Right.
You know, I'm on a one-woman campaign right now to make sure everyone gets this. So the next person might actually see right through them. Right? In which case, they're going to come sniffing around for more. Right? So that's why I'm saying they're trying. I always think of narcissistic people as like being Costco, where we are all the little things they have on the warehouse shelves that they're just going to buy in bulk quantity, and then that's it. And then when we're stale, they're not going to want any more of us. But then they want it still there available to them whenever they want it. That's what. Listen, I've known people, Lisa, who 10, 15 years out of a narcissistic relationship, that person will still circle back. Yep.
And will they take them back?
Sometimes, usually not. I mean, but some do. You remember after 15 years, you start to sort of forget some of the acute wounds. Not everyone does. I think a lot of people are like, what are you, never going to do that. But I think for some people, they're so caught by surprise. Surprise is tricky, right? Because when we're caught by surprise, it tends to be a little bit of a sympathetic nervous system response, right? And so we're just we're not on our game. We're almost kind of, it's like there's an alertness, but it's not a good alertness. It's like an astonished alertness. And when that's the case, we don't always attend to the wholeness of the situation. And our curiosity sometimes gets the best of us too. Narcissistic people play on all of these things all the time. But I do think that the thing that's being played upon is that idea of being chosen. For the narcissistic person, it's a power play. I'm going to go back in there. I'm going to nobody can resist me. You know, they have that kind of saunter. And so they think nobody can resist them. That's their whole grandiose process. They're not aware necessarily that other person also has that vulnerability of that idea of being chosen. And our fantasy may be, narcissistic person screws it up with us. We may not know they're narcissistic. They go off in the world for their new person they cheated on us with, or they're going to go date, or they're going to do whatever. And our fantasy is wait till they go out there and they see how bad it is out there and nobody's going to treat them like I do. And they come back, maybe not for that reason, but that's what they say. Most people will take them back.
And then pile on if you have abandonment issues.
Correct.
That must be like the double whammy, where it's like now you've been abandoned, but they've come back to you.
Yep. And that's the fantasy. If you think of any child who has abandonment issues that go into adulthood, it's that the parent was going to show up again.
Okay, that was just going over the deprivation pattern. We've still got so many more patterns to go through. Talk to me about the betrayal pattern. We touched on it a little earlier.
So narcissistic people lie, and they lie a lot. They lie. Let's start with what's the most fundamental betrayal is somebody lies to you, right? They will lie about big things. They will lie about small things. But the lying allows them to maintain the perfectionistic facade, the delusional sense of them being above everything, to allows them to get away with stuff. And sometimes they just lie for the sake of lying. That's more something we see in psychopathy, but some narcissistic folks do that too. Now, the other things that might fall under betrayal would be things like the infidelity. And you and I talked at length about cheating and infidelity, which I know a lot of people listen to that. And it's not all cheaters are narcissistic. A lot of narcissistic people cheat. They always need new supply. So that cheating may be, it may be sort of DM kind of cheating, a text cheating, could be all the way to full on having a big sexual, love affair kind of cheating. And they're so entitled and they lack empathy. So they sort of feel they have the right to cheat and they don't care how it affects you. So that's a real setup for them betraying someone. And narcissistic people only really think much more about rewards than they do consequences. So the reward is, I'm going to get laid. I'm going to get a blowjob. Like this is, someone's going to tell me I'm the best thing in the world and they're right in front of me, or they're much younger than me, or they're really this, or they're really that. That's sort of the reward. Or just someone's going to tell me I'm fabulous, or I'm going to send these sexy texts to someone and I'm going to have them send me sexy texts back. That's reward. And that motivates narcissistic folks. What they don't think about is consequence. So they're often quite surprised when they're caught and someone's like, I'm out of here, I'm leaving. And they don't even calculate that into the equation. That's very much related to.
Why is that?
It's,
even if you're like super intelligent, you would think that a consequence is part of understanding.
It's really lacking for certain. And again, there's parts of the brain that subserve things like understanding rewards and consequences. And we see that narcissistic people do riskier things. They tend to be more impulsive. Just tends to go with the personality style.
I kind of likened it though in the past, because I know we've spoken about that, but I've always thought about it as being, well, they don't like rules because they like to think that they make the rules. That's how I've kind of always thought about it, not from they don't even consider the consequences.
I think it's partly, again, it's that rewards, with something it actually has a name, it's called reward sensitivity. They're much more acutely aware of rewards. They don't account for consequences. And going to your other point, they're so entitled that they don't think the rules will apply to them, or they've gotten away with it before. The more we get away with things, the more we think we're going to get away with things. That's why narcissistic people are always just absolutely gobsmacked the first time they're not only caught, but then they face a real consequence for something. It's almost they can't process it.
What up, homie? I got something free and new to share with you right now. How often are you visited by that negative voice in your head telling you that you're not smart enough, that you're not good enough, experienced enough, not fill in the blank? One of the most powerful things you can learn to do in life is to turn that negative voice into your bestie. And I want to teach you how to do that and so much more in my 4 steps to becoming confident workshop. And guys, the most amazing thing is you can actually register for completely free for this workshop. So click the link on your screen and I'll see you on the inside.
That's why the lie thing really gets me, because you can't help. Like if you're just saying the words to me and you're completely lying, I don't know if you're telling the truth, and then it just leaves that dynamic very unsettling.
It's very unsettling.
And so thinking through that, it's a great, mind game manipulation tactic to just blatantly lie to people, because no one can really figure out what the truth is and how you're feeling or how you see things. But how do you even navigate that? So like if you start to see someone's lying, in fact, let me back up. The last time when we spoke about cheating in that last episode, you talked about that one story that really hit me, where the woman knew he was having an affair. He'd said he was having an affair. She said, the only thing I care about is you not lying to me about it. That's the only thing. You can go and sleep with other women. And he still lied.
The lie is its own power play. Does that make sense? It's not, I'm more clever. I am, it's a sense of cleverness. It's the game playing. It's the getting away with something. Those are all, in a strange way, those also become sources of narcissistic supply, of that I'm smarter than everybody else. I can do this. And I think in a way it likely was arousing for this person. That there was a certain amount of arousal that came from, this is secret. We could get caught. This is forbidden. And that might then just simply, I think, was getting off on some of that. But, and another, and listen, not all betrayal patterns are at the level of big lies or infidelity. Sometimes it's even betrayal over, they will tell someone they're going to do something and they don't. That goes to that pattern of future faking I had mentioned. And future faking is making a promise about a future event, usually to keep someone around. So I'm going to go to therapy and I'm going to change. We're going to move in 6 months after this happens. I'll be home more often once I get the promotion. Promotion comes, they don't stay home. They don't go to therapy, or they go to therapy, or they lie about going to therapy. Like the thing they promised doesn't happen. The future faking is what keeps people around. Future faking can be part of hoovering. I'm going to change and it's going to be different this time. So a person goes back in. To me, why future faking is a betrayal is now a person has given up more time, sometimes years and years of their lives, going back in the second round. Like, it's no joke. The number of people I said, now that I get narcissism, it sucks because I got hoovered in for another 10 years. 10 years is a long time because they got pulled back in on these false promises. And on that next 10 years, they got in deeper, or the finances got deeper, or they had kids, or whatever the things that might keep a person around and stuck. So those are all betrayals. And I actually think everything that happens in a narcissistic relationship is a betrayal. Stealing someone's sense of self, to me, that's a betrayal. Emotionally abusing someone, that's a betrayal. But really this violation of trust. And it's so sad because, I'm sure we'll talk about it more, I'm sure, is that when your trust is violated regularly like that, or in a big ticket way, it not only hurts, but it often makes it difficult for the person who was betrayed to trust anyone in the future.
Do they deliberately future fake, or is it in that moment they actually do feel sincere about it and then they just don't follow through?
It's often hard to say. I think it's more of a, what do I say now to get what I want? So it's like a sales tactic almost. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I've heard you said they're like the biggest salesmen.
They're great at sales, and that's why they often head companies.
Oh, yeah.
Because who usually gets to be the CEO? The person who was once a really great salesperson, right?
Okay, moving on to the next pattern is the dimmer pattern.
Right. So the dimmer is just an acronym I use to capture sort of classically what happens in these relationships, which is dismissiveness, invalidation, minimization, manipulation, entitlement, and rage. So dismissiveness is just that, like, whatever, like that's not that, whatever, you're like, I can't be bothered with this right now. Please, like, stop talking to me about this. You often feel brushed away. It's interesting because if you look at, and I don't know if you've talked about it on your show, about the idea of John Gottman and the Gottman Institute. To me, the Gottman model only applies when you have two healthy human beings.
Yeah.
I don't think it applied. And I think so many people in narcissistic relationships have actually been a little bit hurt by that model. In fact, I was just working with someone who said she had been in a relationship with someone very narcissistic. They had dealt with all kinds of difficulties and had small children and all of that. And she said, we went in to talk to a Gottman therapist, and the person's just going on about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse and all this stuff. And she's like, and yet the therapist was not able to pick up on how narcissistic the husband was. She's so caught up in sort of the whole thing she was talking about, and was missing the key dynamics of this relationship. One thing that the Gottman folks talk about is this idea of turning toward, right? So if we were in a relationship together, okay, and I said, hey, gosh, you're not going to believe it. Like, look what I found in this drawer, Lisa. And you were like on your phone, you're like, and you weren't paying attention. What I was doing would be called a bid for attention. If you looked up and you turned toward, what Gottman's folks would argue is that's very predictive of the long-term health of a relationship. That even about something small, like I found some random piece of jewelry in a drawer that's not at all germane to that other person, that they would still break out of what they were doing to attune to the other partner. That never happens in a narcissistic relationship, right? That's the dismissiveness, right? I don't think you can teach that. And I think that the difference is that they believe you can teach it. I was like, not when it's a narcissistic person involved. I think that always has to be sort of the disclaimer there, because otherwise people keep sort of like moths to the flame. They just keep bashing themselves against it, thinking they can make this person turn toward. They will never. And that's because the dismissiveness is so central to these narcissistic relationships. Invalidation is a constant, because the invalidation allows the narcissistic person to maintain power. And you're just basically, you aren't seen, you aren't heard, you're not allowed to express a need, you're not allowed to express a want, The only time they're going to meet your need or your want is when it's fully aligned with what they want to do. And then they're not meeting your need. It's just a coincidence at that point that yours happens to be the same as theirs at that moment. The manipulation is constant in all the different ways we're talking about. And manipulation really is them getting what they want, perhaps even making it seem as though it's what's good for you kind of thing. So that's it's constantly, you're not having these straight linear communications because you're playing by two different sorts of rule books. Then there's the minimization. So narcissistic people are very preoccupied with their own pain. So when they're going through something, it's the worst thing that's ever happened in history. But let's say you're going through something, it's not that big a deal. And you will be struck by how you might actually be diagnosed with a severe illness and they'll get a cold. And they're talking about their cold as though it's the worst thing that's ever happened in medical history. You're dealing with a real health crisis. They'll think, oh, you're making too big a deal of it. Like, stop that. If they're going through something, anything, physical pain, illness, work problems, having a bad day, that's all they can focus on, to the detriment of their kids, their partners, anything. It's only their pain. And that's the only thing that they can focus on. Then there's the entitlement.
Before you move over to entitlement, I love this, but the minimalization thing that you spoke about in your book, where so I can't remember her name, but she found out she had cancer, and her husband was annoyed that they had to make time to take her to the doctors.
And it was his first reaction. It literally was like, I've been diagnosed with cancer, got to start treatment right away. And how much, okay, I'm busy. How much time is this going to take me? It wasn't like, oh, babe, oh my God. And that wasn't tears. I'm so worried about it. It was like, how much time is this going to take for me? I don't like hospitals. It's always about them. Always. That's the minimization patterns too. Like, it can't be that big a deal, but it's about to inconvenience me. Then there's entitlement. And entitlement to me is something that happens in the relationship because they really will believe that there's one set of rules for them and one set of rules for everybody else. So it might be that they will rage at you for not putting the keys on the hook by the door. But the time that they forget to do it, it's not that big a deal. That's the entitlement. And that's a tiny example of it. But these happen in some way, shape, or form all the time. And the R of the dimmer, if you will, is both rage and reactivity. The expressions of anger, frustration are disproportionate. They are overwhelming. They're terrifying. And it sets up this really unfortunate pattern whereby people in narcissistic relationships often feel triggered by that rage or they're scared of that rage. It's always in the background of something that could happen. So they walk on eggshells and they're very, very careful to never say anything that will aggravate them or do anything that aggravates them. So now you can see just simply appeasing and managing this narcissistic person becomes some kind of full-time job because you don't want them to be rageful. And they're also very reactive. They'll react like that very, very quickly. They don't stop and think and listen or think about how this could affect the other person. And what the narcissistic person will often do is maybe later, maybe offer an anemic apology, like, yeah, or they'll say the classical narcissistic apology is, I'm sorry you feel that way. That's not an apology. That is a gaslight. Okay, so it's they'll say, I'm sorry you're making, but stop making such a big deal. They just want it to go away. In an interesting way, narcissistic people sometimes are almost a little ashamed. Not even a little. They can be quite ashamed at how messy they can be because they want to be cool-headed, but they can't help themselves. And if other people see it in particular, they'll come up with all kinds of rationalizations and everything, but they will try to downplay it as like, you're all making too big a deal out of it. In the new day and age we're in, Lisa, with people having phones and they can video everything, and that video is shown to the narcissistic person, especially if it's shown publicly, that it completely spins them out even more because it really shows the world how dysregulated they are. They want to look good to the world.
I can imagine that would be fairly dangerous to, like, if a narcissist is raging at you, to pull out your phone.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, they will either throw it, break it, grab it. They'll start videoing you. So it becomes the war of camera phones kind of thing. And so you'll see a lot of that as well. Yeah.
And then they'll try and flip it on you on their camera and rewrite the story. And then they can say they've got the record of it.
Exactly.
and then they do it just the right way, that in that moment, if you're filming them, then you back down, and now they've gained that power back on you. And I like that you call these patterns, because I assume that all of these are patterns versus someone raged once because something really bad happened to them.
It's not a one-off. So
Yeah.
when it's a healthy people do some of these things sometimes,
Right.
okay? They do. You know, oh, come on, it's just a cold. And then the person's getting sicker and you say, oh my gosh, this is not just a cold.
Yeah, I've done that to my poor husband.
You attend and then you're like, okay, let me go up, let me take care of you. And then you're careful to never do that again, right? A person who is healthy might get really mad at something and then they'll apologize very quickly thereafter and say, I was completely out of line. I know I was upset, but that was not okay. That was scary for you. I'm so sorry I hurt you. There's accountability, there's awareness the other was hurt. If that happens once and it doesn't happen again, or it happens almost never again, that's not narcissism. We're looking at, there's a consistency to personality, and this pattern will show up again and again. So much so that the other person in the relationship is starting to change their behavior in anticipation, is wondering, maybe I'm making too big a deal. And you know what, Lisa? I've known people who've been in long-term narcissistic relationships because they were minimized so much about their health. They then minimize their own health. And in some cases, didn't get preventative screenings. Stage 1 cancers were stage 3 by the time they were found. This is not a joke. Like, you're told so often, like, oh, it's not that big a deal, or you don't want to inconvenience the narcissistic person, that some people may not. They start to, you hear something enough, you start to believe it, because it is an indoctrination. And so the dimmer stuff really does become an indoctrinated process whereby you no longer trust yourself. You are sort of living and behaving in a way that appeases them. You are giving up your identity. You doubt yourself. You blame yourself. That's the net result of all those so-called dimmer patterns.
Wow, it never occurred to me that the health thing, that they would make fun of you if you say you've got something that's wrong with you. So you then go see the doctor and you've gone from stage 1 to stage 3 cancer.
Oh, heck yeah. They say, the person's like, oh, it's just a stomach ache. Just a stomach ache. I'm being dramatic.
Yeah, God, that never dawned on me. I've always thought of it as definitely a ding on your confidence and then just like your general health. But it never dawned on me that it would be that you then don't go and seek help for something that actually ends up being like catastrophic.
Severe. Yeah, because you minimize, and you minimize. Like, because you were told so many times, that's not a big deal, that's not a big deal, that's not a big deal. And then you have this symptom and you're thinking, oh, here, I guess I'm making a big deal of it again. I'm just being a baby.
That's rough. Oh God, I never thought about that. So if anyone's listening right now, if you've got an ailment, like go see it.
Go see a doctor
immediately.
And here's the thing I would say, if you're in a narcissistic relationship, don't tell them about it. They're not going to be a source of support to you. So if you're feeling something, it doesn't feel right, talk to a friend, go right to your doctor if you have no one to talk to, but get the help. Just don't tell them, because they ain't going to help you anyhow.
Yeah. Jeez, God. Thank you for that. I'd like to move on to the domination pattern now.
Yeah. So the domination patterns are the things that allow them to maintain control. And I think most noteworthy here are things like rage, right? And I've made that part of dimmer, but it's really that sense of, I hold the power, I can control you. Now, the domination patterns tend to show up in more severe narcissistic relationships. Sometimes the domination patterns, though, in more moderate narcissistic relationships can show up as somebody taking control of all the finances. I cannot tell you, Lisa, how many people I've talked, especially women over 50 or over 60 who are getting divorces, where finances in a long-term marriage or relationship got really intermingled. And the partner would say, you got enough going on. I've got the money stuff and all. They're like, extent of my involvement with the finances every year was to sign off on the tax forms. And yeah, maybe I had my own little account, or I had my credit card, but I wasn't paying attention to the rest of it. So many women are socialized to not feel confident with money, to not know how money works. If there's only one thing I wish every woman was forced to do, was take a deep financial literacy class, because that's where people get stuck. And when someone's like, I'll take care of this headache, it feels like they're being helpful. Like, okay, they got this covered and we're doing well. Like, look at all this. And then one day when you decide to pull the plug, guess what you don't know a damn thing about is the finances.
Do they normally do that tactic thing as a nice thing of like, no, I'll take it off your
They'll
hands?
sell it as a nice thing.
Interesting. Why that specifically?
I work in this area. Like, I know this stuff, or I've been doing this for a long time, or, I'm always like watching the stock market, this or that, or especially if they have any kind of thing in business, right? That is often where that will happen. It doesn't happen every time, but that financial domination, and it doesn't look like domination. It's somebody saying, I'll take care of this. It feels so helpful, but they're running the show and everything. And where the first time people might see it is if they ever even stop to think to say, oh, what do our investments look like? Let's say they're watching a show like this, right? They're watching us and say, let me ask about the finances. And I would almost guarantee that a narcissistic person is like, why do you need to say, what, don't you trust me? Like look how well we're living. I've been managing the finances for years. Like, why would you need to see that? You're not going to understand it. And if you push it, they will get rageful.
And in this tactic, because there's so many different ways that we've spoken about already, where it's like they'll be a little forceful, they'll be manipulative. Obviously, this is a manipulation tactic on their part. This is a game that they're playing on, and for them to be able to take control. But it's interesting that they're nice about it in this one. Is it so that you actually do lower your guard and you're like, okay, this is the thing that they're...
It's a manipulation.
Yeah.
It's a manipulation. It's not like they're like, you're dumb, I don't want you near the money.
That's what I'm saying.
No, it's not that. A malignant narcissist might pull that, like, you don't know anything. You stay away from this money stuff. That's a different dynamic. I'm talking more in the moderate narcissistic range. A lot of folks have said, listen, I was busy with kids. I actually didn't know a lot about how money worked. I didn't get it. They seem to really get it, especially when you have a lot of other things going on. Kids are a classical example of that. You're running around after little kids, especially if you're also working. When all that stuff gets combined, people are like, the last thing I'm going to do is sit here with a report of the money and the stocks and the this and the that. A lot of people feel really overwhelmed by that.
What other type of dominance? Because I didn't expect you to say that as number one, right? You kind of think when you think dominance is they want to overpower you. So it means like they're going to be trying like intimidate you a little. So I didn't expect the finance thing. What other things like that may we not even perceive as a dominance pattern, but actually it is?
I think another domination pattern we'll see is that there is and this is probably more embedded in the gaslighting pattern, is there'll always be sort of this remote threat of abandonment hanging up. It's almost like it's hanging so far off in the distance you don't see it, but they'll bring it out. So anytime you bring up any sort of like the relationship isn't going the way you want, or you really want to talk some things out about anything, they'll say, yeah, well, if you're not content in this relationship, maybe we should call it quits. That ability for them to have abandonment in their back pocket, if abandonment's your thing. Because for a lot of folks are saying, I wasn't looking to end the relationship. I just wanted to see if we could make it healthier. Which I wanted to say, there was no making it healthier. You trying to create more accountability was them saying, I can't be bothered. But the way they did it is, no, maybe this isn't for you. But they're very, very careful to make sure, because narcissistic people actually are kind of abandonment. They're what we call rejection sensitive, right? Some of them, they struggle with their own abandonment stuff, but if they know you do as well, they will use that as like, I guess you don't want to be in this, especially if it's a long-term, committed relationship. Most people aren't looking to get out. They just want to have a conversation. But that's another example of domination. It shuts the conversation down. It's just a silent treatment. It's a form of domination. You don't think of that as a form of domination, but it is. If a person knows that if I push too hard, this person is going to withdraw and stop speaking to me. The silent treatment is the ultimate form of domination because we want to break through it. So before long, we're doing anything they're asking us to do to get them to start talking again.
So it's kind of like taking all the consequences of you speaking up, taking action, standing up for yourself, and then creating a consequence that they know you're not going to want. So that anytime, so silent treatment is, okay, if you bring this up, I'm going to be silent. I know you hate silence because to you maybe silence means being ignored, not meaning having much meaning in the world. So they're using these tactics. Very interesting. Ooh, that's a tricky one to kind of navigate.
I don't think there is any navigating it. That's the problem. I remember working with a woman once where they lived in a house together with their kids. And at the point we had our session, she's like, we're in our almost 4th week of silent treatment. He literally wasn't speaking. Show up to dinner, say nothing. And somehow coordination was happening and all of that. But you feel like you're losing your mind. It's passive aggressive. It's meant to be, and yet to the world, it doesn't look conflictual. The world is not seeing two people screaming at each other.
Yeah, which makes it even worse because going back to then the gaslighting, am I going crazy, messing with how you feel or think, now just gets even more confusing.
Yep.
All right, and now I'd love to move on to the disagreeable pattern and actually have a quote of yours. I love this quote so much. Oh my God. Never wrestle with a pig. You end up dirty and the pig likes it.
Yes. So that's an old quote. And they do. Disagreeableness is, they welcome a fight. They welcome an argument. That's why narcissistic people often make great attorneys, because they love a fight and they don't shirk from a fight. And they are able to get in there, and they can, again, it's a place of domination too, right? So it plays on that need for them as well, and that sort of set of behaviors. But they're very disagreeable. They are hostile. They are abrupt. They are high conflict, and very conflictual. They are, the lack of empathy falls under disagreeableness. So it is all the stuff that makes everything difficult, right? Asking them to do anything. I always use sort of the dishwasher example. They're so disagreeable that asking them to empty the dishwasher is such a miserable experience that you do it yourself. You're thinking, going through this, listening to them being a spoiled teenager and not emptying the dishwasher is so much worse than taking the 7 minutes to empty it myself. But before long, you can see how this again creates another asymmetry in the relationship. The other person in the narcissistic relationship is having to pretty much keep all the trains running on time. And the only ones that the narcissistic person is involved in is what matters to them. But because it's like, oh my gosh, I can't even bear the thought of asking them to get the kids from the soccer game. And then people will move heaven and earth to avoid dealing with all that disagreeable stuff.
And is that why they're disagreeable? Like, where does that actually stem from? Because I assume they always want to be right.
They always want to be right. So let me tell you what the opposite of it is. It's almost an easier thing to describe the opposite. The opposite of disagreeableness is agreeableness. Okay? Agreeable people are warm, welcoming, sweet, kind, humble, empathic, gentle. That's agreeable. Now think of the opposite. It's who they are. An agreeable person is agreeable. Even if you catch an agreeable person on a bad day, they may furrow their brow and say, oh, this isn't a great time for this. I really, really want to listen to you. I do. I got 27 fires burning. And that agreeable person will feel terrible for the rest of the day that they couldn't do the thing that person wanted them to do, and might even text and check in later. But 9 times out of 10, you're with an agreeable person. They're agreeable. They go along, and I mean, agreeable people are the best. They're great. They're wonderful. Disagreeable is the opposite. And that's the inherent nature of narcissistic people. Listen, you see it as if you could look at home movies of narcissistic adults when they were children, little kids, they were disagreeable kids.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. Mean with their toys, mean with their siblings, demanding of the parent, more likely, you know how when kids get a little angry, they'll like, blah, 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 they'll bump against the parents like shins or, they're like that as kids. They're like that as kids. They're very oppositional. You brought that up before. The disagreeableness is very much manifested in the, you can't make me do this. Like they're obsessed with, I have freedom. You can't make me do this. That oppositional thing is narcissism 101. Like, I'm thinking, this is such a small ask, but it's as though the gratification of the power of saying, I'm not doing what you tell me, even sometimes the thing you're asking them to do is going to make their life easier. They won't do it because somebody told them to do it. So you always got to figure out the back door, right? Of getting them to do things. If you really need them to do something, it's like everything feels, you almost feel like you have to become manipulative to sometimes get the narcissistic person to do something. You can't ask them directly. And it was very, very interesting because this, it was somebody I'd worked with who she had a chronic illness. So she had to go, I forgot if it was dialysis or something. She had to go get regular medical treatments. And the narcissistic husband was never any help. And she was having her heart broken regularly by this narcissistic partner, never being willing to take her or pick her up from these very regular kinds of medical appointments that she had to go to. And the one thing, and we worked on all the stuff, the radical acceptance, the realistic expectations. As long as you ask him, I explained to her, he's never going to take her. He's going to take you in this grumpy way. You need to work on a plan B. That's really sort of coping 101 when you're with a narcissist. You've got to come up with a plan B. And so, together we worked it out and talked about it, and then came to find out that through a combination of some friends, and also there was in her town, there was a service, so you could get a van to take you to a healthcare appointment. You just had to make a request far in advance. And when they weren't available, she had the friends couldn't do it all the time, but she came up with a solution. And so she'd get her bag and go up the stairs, and he'd say, "Where are you going?" And she'd say, "Well, I'm going to my appointment." And he's like, "What do you mean? How are you going to get there?" And she said, "No, I forgot the healthcare van had a name to the healthcare van." And he's like, "What?" And it was as though, "How dare you?" Right? But so it's almost like she took away his ability to be mean to her about it. And she said it felt so good to not ever have to rely on him again after that. That's how people cope with these relationships. There's no version of this where she was going to convince him to not be a jerk whenever she asked for her ride.
What would you do in a situation where you even said, right, go the back door? That's kind of her saying, I'm just not going to allow him to be the mechanism in which I need something from him, so I'm going to solve it. But what about, I still need him to take me, but I don't want him to be mean about it. What's the backdoor possibility there? There's no way of making his ego big that makes him feel good about
in the short term,
her.
Lisa. So if it's a one-time thing, okay, one-time thing, you might be able to fluff them for a day, you're the best, and oh my gosh, and I'm so lucky.
Right.
Meanwhile, you're throwing up in your mouth the whole time you're saying it, right? So for some people, honestly, they have to weigh out the toll of being that inauthentic and telling this person who's mistreating you how great they are. People I'd rather pay $200 to a taxi than, ask this person to do this or to do this or to do this. And then sometimes you just got to say again, is there a version where when you ask them directly to do something, every so often you might get lucky, they might be nice about it, but that's luck, right? It's like buying a winning lottery ticket. Or it's sometimes you're like, I'm just going to have to tolerate their rage because they have to do this thing. I have no choice. And so you go in and the thing you're doing is so important to you that you tolerate the rage. That's radical acceptance. Because what people want is they want the version where the narcissistic person gets sweet about the thing you're asking them. They're too oppositional. That's never going to happen.
So we've touched upon it, but I'd really love to go through the narcissistic relationship cycle that you break down in your book, because I think that understanding the cycle with everything that we've just laid out, the patterns can be really valuable for people. So you mentioned it earlier, but you said love bombing. Talk to me about the love bombing stage, and then in your book you also lay out after the love bombing stage between, I think you say it's 3 weeks to 6 months.
Yeah, usually. Yeah.
That's when then the degradation starts happening.
Right. So the love bombing, everyone's talking about love bombing these days, right? In the classical description of love bombing, it's usually a grandiose narcissist who comes in strong. They're charming, they're charismatic, they're attractive, they might be successful, they may be very confident, they pay a lot of attention to you, there's lots of attentive text messages, they make the plans, they take you to the new restaurant, you go on a vacation quickly. It's all the things. It's exciting, right? And it oftentimes, especially if it's a counterbalance to a prior relationship. So let's say you were in a relationship where your partner wasn't attentive or they didn't have a lot of resources. Now, all of a sudden, you're being whisked off to this and that restaurant, or you're going on this and that trip. It feels like such a difference. Or your old partner didn't respond a lot by text, and this person's always, "Good morning, my darling," and all this other stuff. It is very, very seductive. And because it's almost perfect, it's a period of idealization. And they idealize you too at that point. They'll say, I've never dreamed this could happen. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. You're amazing. People want to hear that, especially if you've had a history of relationships where that didn't happen, if you had a childhood where you didn't feel seen. All of that combines to that sense of sort of this mutual idealization. Everyone's putting each other on pedestals, pedestals are dangerous because things always fall off. I always say you don't ever want to be put on or put someone else on a pedestal. And so this goes on for a while, long enough to indoctrinate someone, just like you would into a cult, right? Cults are super fun in the beginning, right? And then, and then it all goes apart, falls apart. So it's very much it's a seduction, it's an idealization, it's also an indoctrination. It's the fairy tale. And narcissistic people are very socially perceptive. They have this innate capacity to figure out what the other person wants. That's why they're good at sales, right? So they figure out, because they might even be able to figure out, well, what Lisa would want would be different than what Ramani would want. And they might even shift their ground game to please each of us differently. Same narcissistic person. That's what I'm saying. These are not socially dumb people. They're actually quite socially skilled. The narcissistic person can sometimes play a little bit of a long game, right? Or they'll do that threatening of abandonment. So if a person's being very, very sort of suspicious and saying, okay, well, if you're, the narcissist might say, I get it. Like, you're not feeling this. You may not be ready for a committed relationship, and I could respect that. And then they're going to get up and go. So with them is going to go all the fun. And so a lot of people say, oh, I'm being closed off. I'm being ridiculous. I've got to stop watching that stupid Dr. Ramani's videos and all her stupid red flags. Like, this is the real thing. And then they start watching the love videos, and then they're in. Okay. And then they go and they had the sense of the red flags. But that threat of abandonment, like, okay, because the narcissistic person isn't trying to suck them back in. They do something even more tricky. And they'll say, okay, well, I guess you don't really, maybe you're just not in a time in your life where you want a committed relationship, when in fact, that's exactly what the person wanted. But they were noticing some things that were making them uncomfortable. And so the narcissistic person throws the door wide open, like, oh, it's totally fine. Like, I get it. You're not ready. And you're thinking, but this person took me out to all these dinners and they were really nice to me. And so what if they did this, and this? Like, I'm being ridiculous. And the person will gaslight themselves and talk themselves out. I'm closed off. I'm cynical. I'm the one who's the problem. This is why I never end up in relationships. And then they throw themselves all in. There's a moment when the narcissistic person knows, gotcha. And then when they got them, then we go into devalue. And the devaluing phase is it's psychologically a complex phase for the narcissistic person. It gets into dynamics I've actually talked with you about, which is almost as though that deep, unprocessed insecurity of the narcissistic person is almost like, well, if you're willing to hang out with me this long, you can't be worth much. But I also think it's because narcissistic people are novelty seekers. They always want more and new and new and more. So once they've got you where they want you, they're not going to expend the effort anymore. And the cracks show. Listen, even in a healthy, regular relationship, we might have fun in the beginning, but there's a point at which you're like, I got to wake up early for work on Monday. And hey, like, I've really enjoyed spending time with you, but the towel, the floor, like, there's a different, there's those little things you can negotiate. This is more than that. This is where the gaslighting begins. This is where the invalidation happens, the minimization. But the problem is, interspersed in there are still some of those love bomb goodies. This is where the trauma bond gets built, because now you're going back and forth between uncomfortable experiences and what feel like primally soothing, comforting, exciting experiences. You go back and forth, comfort, discomfort, comfort, discomfort. That creates the trauma bond. And now the person feels as though they kind of can't live without this person, even though people from the outside are saying, this seems like it's not cool anymore. And this process of devaluing can last years. It really can. This phase can last a long time. And it alternates. You might have the sprinkles of goodness, little tiny, echoes of the love bomb. Over time, and this could take months, this could take more years. And love bombing can last 3 weeks to 6 months, can go as long as a year. I've heard of that happening too. Then you'll get into the discard. Now, the discard doesn't just mean that they get rid of you. The discard can mean that period of neglect that we've talked about. The discard means that they withdraw, they withhold, they're not around, they don't listen to you, they're not interested, they may cheat, but they've checked out. Okay, they just almost like they're keeping you around for whatever bits of supply you're giving them. They may end the relationship with you.
That's what I'm going to say. They must be getting some supply
They're
by
getting
keeping
supply
you
from somewhere.
Yeah.
Yes, or you're serving. You're doing things for them. You could be a source of money for them. You could be a source of, you can put meals on the table for them. You have sex with them. Whatever functions you serve, they're very calculating. They'll see that. Sometimes discard is when you get rid of them, right? And because you've had it, and that starts a different kind of a game, which is now because leaving. It's so much better when the narcissist breaks up with you, because then it's a clean break. But if you try to break up with them, they've lost control. They don't like that. They feel abandoned. And you get into what's called post-separation abuse, which can be anything from stalking to surveillance to angry emails to angry text messages. And then in most cases, but not all, discard will be followed by hoover, which is the attempt to pull the person back into the dance, back into the relationship. It depends. Sometimes a hoover might not happen for years. Sometimes it'll happen in days.
What up, homie? I got something free and new to share with you right now. How often are you visited by that negative voice in your head telling you that you're not smart enough, that you're not good enough, experienced enough, not fill in the blank? One of the most powerful things you can learn to do in life is to turn that negative voice into your bestie. And I want to teach you how to do that and so much more in my 4 steps to becoming confident workshop. And guys, the most amazing thing is you can actually register for completely free for this workshop. So click the link on your screen and I'll see you on the inside.
This cycle of love bombing, devaluing, and discarding is not just a one-off. It can happen like month to month in a narcissistic relationship. Idealize, devalue, discard, even think of breaking up. Those couples you see that are always making up and breaking up. This is that cycle playing out. I'm not saying that those are always narcissistic cycles, but that's what this cycle is. And it happens in just about every narcissistic relationship. They start very strong, too strong, and then they fall apart.
God, as you were breaking that down, also I was thinking it's kind of, the joke of it is like choose your own adventure. Did you ever play those, right? Where it's like you choose, because even when you said, well, if you do this, then they will just go through another mechanism. Or if you choose this and you don't fight back, then this will happen. And so knowing those mechanisms, the way that you just broke down, I think is really helpful for people to know and start to identify. And the fact that you even said it doesn't always happen in this way, in this, sometimes you'll have the both. And I think that that's also going back to, the thing we've been echoing throughout this episode, is that's what creates the confusion. Is that you're discarded and then love bombed, or they're being hoovered and you're being invalidated. And so mix all these things in, it's harder to then identify, put words to it, because once you put words to it, I think it becomes a little like knowledge is power, right? And so it allows you to then come up with a plan if you need to.
And it's not clean. I mean, that's the thing. I think people want it to be the classical, they took me out to these great dinners, and we went on this fabulous tropical vacation, and then over time they devalued me. It's not that simple. They're looking for what they want. That's really what it is, by figuring out what you want. Make sense? That's what I'm saying. It's a sales job in many ways. And they really spend the time getting to know you, peering deeply at you. And this is, again, where it tricks people, because everyone thinks of the narcissistic person as neglectful and unattuned. But for a moment in time, they're more attuned than any human being in the world, because they're trying to get information out of you. And that moment of someone just like taking you in, when you connect it to what many people might not have gotten developmentally as they were establishing early attachments, right? That they didn't have that deeply attuned parent, or their parent was distracted a lot, that somebody would roll up and think you're so important that they're going to spend hours and hours and hours and hours and hours getting to know you. Instead of being suspicious, I do, but instead of being suspicious, people will think, this is what I deserved all along. So these are often people in the strongest part of themselves saying, I deserve to be treated well, and this person is so attuned to me. That's why this is so diabolical, because the standard trope of people get into narcissistic relationships because they're insecure, because they're weak, because they're vulnerable. No, these are sometimes people who are like, I'm finally getting the treatment I deserve. This person is treating me like the princess that I am. That's the problem, is that anyone can get trauma bonded. But it's that backing and forth thing. But initially, they may actually play on someone's confidence and someone's ego strength.
The confidence part is the thing I've really noticed, is that one of the probably the biggest things from narcissistic relationships, that when someone's left, their confidence has just gone.
It's gone. It's gone.
Crap.
But it might have been there once upon a time.
Right.
That's what's devastating. Is I have met folks who said, when I met this person, I was at the top of my game. I was in the job I wanted. I was in the apartment I wanted. I loved my life. I was on my pathway and had, and then they said I was in tatters and in pieces, but that was not the path I was on. Anyone is vulnerable. And if anyone's walking around like, I could see this coming from a mile away, no, you can't. That's the problem.
Yeah, that is a problem. And then as you lose your confidence and then they do all these tactics as we've been talking about, they're almost like them playing on your fear because you feel like you are whole, they've broken you down, now you're just a piece. And then if they threaten to leave you, they're like tapping into that fear of now the abandonment that you said, but also now they're leaving you in pieces. You don't have that confidence. So you're holding on to it. And I actually have a quote of yours about fear itself. You said, fear is the most powerful adhesive we have. The fear ties are as sticky as a spider's web.
Yeah, because it's the fear of no one else, I'm damaged. No one's going to want me. The devil I know. What if I'm always going to be alone? And a big fear folks have is, what if they change for the next person? What if they go on into their best life and I'm left here in all these pieces, wondering, and I'm a mess? It's always the fear that they're going to move on and it's all going to work out for them. Here's the thing. And this, I know most survivors, even people listening to this, are rolling their eyes saying, oh, this doesn't make me feel better, is the narcissistic person is never going to change. They're going to be this person for the next person. The next person isn't you. Does that make sense? They're different too. They may even look like you. They're a different person. And I'm not saying that there's anyone out there that likes being in a narcissistic relationship, but I do think that there are people out there who may not be, they may be looking for different things. I've seen this happen, Lisa. I recently had watched a story unfold where it was a very narcissistic person and they leave a nice person and then they quickly get into a new relationship. But the new person is so superficial. I don't know that the new person's narcissistic, but the new person is so superficial that they are not, it's almost as though the superficial stuff's enough for that person. So let's say you're a person who wants a connection. You want connection and empathy and closeness and all that stuff, right? And obviously the narcissistic person is absolutely, and you're constantly, why aren't we spending time? And you're trying to communicate with them and it's all a mess. And they end up and they find their new source of supply, right? Their new source of supply, let's say, is again, someone very hollow and superficial, maybe not even narcissistic, just superficial and just cares just how they look to the world. And that narcissistic person is almost kind of working for them because it's all superficial. It's all a relationship of Instagram posts and, you know, look what they bought me and all, you know what I'm saying? It's that. You're not that superficial person. So had you been able to keep it that superficial, maybe the relationship would have worked. Is that who you are? No. The who you are could not have worked with this. Are there some people who can make it work? Everyone's different. There's 7 billion of us on this planet, right? So they may make it work, but it's not a better life because that could not be what you would have with them because you wanted something more. And I think a lot of people think like, oh, maybe it's too much to ask for closeness and connection. And I'm like, no, that's sort of the base model, folks. Like that's it. That's what you want. And being content with, you know, a picture in front of a sunset is not, you know, but for some person that might be enough. And if the narcissistic person finds that hollow person, they may actually work for the long term. That can be. And that plays on that fear. You know, in a way, going back to your benching, Lisa, some people in narcissistic relationships do their own form of benching, which is, I don't want this person out there to go meet their new person, to go, because here's the other fear too, is that you were doing all these things for the narcissistic person, right? And that they're going to find someone else who will do those things for them. And you're like, are you kidding me? Right? And so there's a sense of some people like, I don't even want to let this person go because I don't want to let the narcissist go because I know they're going to go off and meet someone else.
Dude, that's so strong. I didn't want to interrupt you. I was holding my breath. That's so strong. Like when I think about, you do that, right? You look at the other and it's like, oh my God, but they're making it work. Did I let something go? And you start to remember the one thing that was good. You've mentioned it many times, right? Your euphoric recall, where you're going back and you're like, but that one moment. And the part that was missing for me that just fit in like beautifully, like the puzzle pieces, they may find someone that doesn't mind being superficial.
That's right. That's
and so,
exactly right.
Of course, it's not even maybe they found someone that's going to put up with stuff that you're not willing to put up with. It's that they actually may not care and they may be superficial enough to just take...
Because they're getting some superficial need. I mean, because one thing that narcissistic people are great at being is Instagram boyfriends, girlfriends, partners. They're really good at that. Like they like the show. Not always, but much of the time. So if they're meeting someone who that's all they want, that's probably going to be a win for them.
Yeah. Oh my God, girl, this has been a freaking masterclass. Guys, if you're watching, please do subscribe for more of these amazing videos. But where can people find you and your amazing book?
Please pre-order my book. Please, oh please, I beseech you. You can pre-order my book anywhere you buy your books, anywhere. And so you can do that and you will get it right when it comes out. You can find me at my website, drramani.com. You can find me on YouTube every day. For people who want to do a deeper dive into healing, especially you read something like this and say, okay, I need to do this work. We have a healing program that's a monthly healing program for people who are experiencing and want to heal from narcissistic relationships. But you know, I poured my heart into this book. Like it really was, it wasn't just a book. And so I hope people realize that, and in realizing this, that the big takeaway from this book is not only, it's almost like, there's a little bit about narcissists, but it's about you. It's about your healing, but more than anything, the real takeaway from this book is healing is not only possible, many people can come out of this much stronger than they ever went in.
If you've ever been triggered or felt betrayed, then keep watching to learn how to actually control your emotions.
I love having the idea or having the feeling that I'm considered. All of this comes back to childhood where I felt very limited moments of being considered unless I was performing, you know, and having that moment of like having someone, you know, see me, do something, acknowledge me is something that I deeply, deeply want. I now know my pattern enough and know that when that desire is really active for me, it's an invitation, of course, maybe to outwardly ask for my need directly to be met, for that active consideration of validation from a partner, a loved one, a parent, whoever it is. And in the occasion where that human can't or won't provide that for me for whatever multitude of reasons why someone might not be able to or choose to show up for me in that moment, I now have the opportunity to know that that's a marker that I can, an invitation for me to provide that to myself. Because again, going back to the normal humanness of these needs, I think a lot of us are like, well, just squash it down. I shouldn't need validation. For me, I shouldn't need to be considered. In reality, I've learned that when I'm feeling that actively, I do actually need to be considered. It just might not come, or that person that I want it from might not be available, but I'm available. So I use that now as a moment or an opportunity for me to ask myself, well, okay, Nicole, if you're so desperate for consideration, is it possible that you're feeling like last on your priority list? Are you not maybe showing up for yourself? Yes, ideally, maybe you want your loved one, your parent, whoever it is, to offer you that validation, that consideration. And if they're not available, can I gift myself with that?
So I'm always thinking, how do you set yourself up for success? Because in those moments, sometimes you get emotional, right? Where it's like, it's hard to go from, oh, hey, baby, and then they dismiss you to you go, okay, well, I'm just gonna go fit in myself. Like in that moment, you just feel freaking dismissed. And so how do you go to then, all right, right now, I'm feeling dismissed, right? Like in real time, how do you process that? And do you have like a cheat sheet or something that you can go to? It's like, I feel dismissed, crap, what am I gonna do? Go for a walk, got it.
I'm laughing because in reality, my moments of aha realization usually occur after I've thrown a temper tantrum, I've asked someone to come hug me, but held my arm up, my dagger's out, and don't let them near me. And so moments of clarity for me still aren't in real time, but giving ourselves the space, the awareness to dive deeper can be the beginning of the journey.
I love that you said that, because that is so important. I really need people to really freaking hear that, because here you are, you've done the work, right? You've written amazing books, you live your life in this space, and yet even you saying, look, it's still freaking hard, I have to do it after, is so aligning. I really hope people hear that. Guys, honestly, hear the words that came out of my mouth. Don't seek perfection. Hear that you can learn it. Hear that you can evolve. I'm so sorry. I just had to say that. Thank you for being that honest.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the reality, especially when we're talking about these core reactive spaces. Those will be the last to change. It's a gift to give yourself that post-play where you're able to dive in, right? Because that's where it will begin. You know, ideally we learn to be more conscious and to make those different choices in real time. Though again, the reality of it is this is wired into our neurobiology quite literally. My body is already beginning to activate me, and I'm already interpreting, and all my systems and juices are off to the races before I even catch on to, oh my gosh. And again, that speaks to the point of the more consistently conscious we are, the more we can make different choices before we lose that control.
Right.
So for me, it even includes like day to day, right? When I go through periods like this, especially I'm promoting this workbook. So I'm traveling, I'm not sleeping as well. That means that my resources are generally lower. It's going to make it harder in those moments then to catch myself. Ooh. When I'm firing on all cylinders, I'm, taking care of my body, I'm getting the sleep I need, I'm getting the movement I need, I'm getting the nutrients I need, I'm breathing calmly and deeply all the time, then those are the moments where I might be more likely in real time to notice as my stress gets amplified, because that's usually what we're noticing first. Notice as my heart rate and I start to tense, as I'm starting to create, and send myself down that old path, and then make a new choice then. We attempt to notice when we're already so knee deep, locked and loaded and emotionally reactive that we're not setting ourselves up to succeed, or we're not doing anything to care for our body outside of those moments, and then expecting, some breath work to work or this conversation to come to top of mind the next time you're getting ready to scream, and you to remember to do what Dr. Nicole said. And that's just so unrealistic that we need to set ourselves up to succeed consistently, which means creating that consistent relationship where I can notice I'm depleted, I'm stressed out. So when I now go home and return to my partners, right, after a trip like this, I might not have that bandwidth. I might need to go and take care of myself and ground myself and get some rest, or I might find myself reactive in those moments.
Oh my God, this is so good. Like, the reason why this is so, amazing, and what you're saying is, it's this predictability. It's know thyself, don't judge thyself, right? Yes. So it's like, oh, I know myself well enough to know that when I travel, I'm going to get less sleep. When I get less sleep, I'm more irritable. When I'm more irritable, something's going to trigger me quicker, right? And just now, when you're about to book a trip, then you're going to be like, oh, like being aware of, I'm going to be more susceptible now to being triggered. I'm going to be more susceptible now to feeling a certain way, to feeling dismissed. And so at least almost just warning yourself is a beautiful thing to do. And I love that so much. And I also liken this to knowing our cycles, knowing our hormones, right? Because exactly what you're saying, if we can lose our shit because we're hangry, right? Because we're just we're so hungry that we get angry. Now think about how we show up, if our hormones, if it's the beginning of our cycle versus the end of our cycle, if we've had the stacking effect of not eating, not sleeping, traveling, maybe having a bad experience, something's failed, and now imagine someone comes to you and even remotely skates around your triggers, you're going to be way more likely to have that eruption.
Right. And the reality, and again, why the workbook even begins with those body type habits is so few of us are caring for our body for many different reasons. We don't even think we need to, or that's part of this conversation around emotions. Before we even go into the part 2 around the whole emotional world, it's again understanding that we do have a body, and that is very much something that we need to care for. And I'm speaking from myself, who sleep was never a priority. I was eating inflammatory foods all of the time, for me. And so my whole resting state was a state of depletion. So everything I was doing, going about my day, I was living in that cycle of reactivity. I actually had no chance to be calm, to be grounded, to make new choices, to be in alignment, because none of my resources were ever met, unbeknownst to me, because half of this information, I didn't even know that it was important to take care of my body. I didn't realize the role that our gut plays. I didn't realize the role that our nervous system plays, which is, again, why with my first book, I was so passionate about getting that information out there so that we can know, and then we can start to not only make those choices to set ourselves up to succeed, but to give ourselves the grace in those moments, because some things are outside. When when we're going through moon cycles, when we're going through our cycles, right? I notice very much shifts and changes along with that too, in terms of my sleep and my overall stress-based resources, and that will then lead to more moments of reactivity.
Where do body beliefs lie in everything that we're talking about now, about getting yourself grounded?
Yeah, so what we think about our body is so much as well grounded in the experiences that we had. How were bodies modeled in our homes, right? Were bodies a comfortable part of day-to-day existence? Did we see caregivers who tended and cared for their body? Did we see maybe the quite opposite? Bodies weren't even talked about. I know for me, there was never nudity in my home. There was never conversation around body or changes like in the human development. None of that was discussed with me. It was as if we were all walking around afraid of a body becoming ill. That was very present, but we never actually talked about tending to a body. So how we care for our body is going to impact what we think of it. Also how we hear other people talking about our body, about their bodies. They might give us the best advice to care for our body, but maybe we have a caregiver who's so shaming of their own body, always on a diet, always self-critical, always trying to modify it in some way. They might be praising our body, but again, we're going to be impacted by the shame that we see reflected in how they're caring for their bodies. So what we think about our body is very much grounded often in the experiences that we had around bodies in general, our body in general, and then it goes to inform how we care for our body growing up. If I've learned, it's not surprising that, like I just shared with you, I didn't care for my body at all. I wasn't taught to. I was taught that a body only gets sick. I wasn't taught how to care for wellness in a body. So it's not surprising that I was entering my 30s and I had very limited care for my body. I had a lot of shame around my body. Again, not seeing a body being honored, being appreciated, seeing very much criticism around dieting. I saw my mom and my sister diet. I saw very negative comments. My mom made comments to me when she would see my weight fluctuating. So not only was I disconnected from my body, I didn't think very favorable about it at all. I'm actually quite shameful. And all of this came from how I saw bodies related, tended to, and how I experienced my own body in relationship with those around me.
Wow, how old were you when your mom did that?
My entire life. My mom, very much based in her own, conditioning. I'm sure what she saw from her mother was always commenting. Interestingly enough, it was very confusing because while she would so quickly, assess when I've, gained weight or whatever it might be and comment on that, she would just as quickly then too comment on not taking seconds at dinner, because she very much learned one of the main ways my mom connected in absence of connecting emotionally with us, her children, was by providing, always having the dinner on the table, providing food, baking my favorite cupcakes. So very confusing. And I think this really illustrates some of the messaging we get, right?
Yeah.
Watch your body, but eat to love me at the same time. And then all of this got mixed up, confused in terms of I still see moments not only where I'm shameful of my body, but where I reward my body, myself, my achievements with food, very much like my mom, or I tried to connect with other people around. Of course, culturally, I think that's a different conversation in terms of connecting, but in my family, it was the only point of connection.
Wow, and how did that impact your self-esteem?
Oh my gosh, I mean, our bodies, even if we're minimizing and distracting ourselves from the fact that we have them, I mean, they're part of ourself, right? They're our reflection outward. We adorn them with clothes, right? So how we feel in our skin very much does translate to how we feel about our self, at least our physical self in general. Sometimes it washes over our entire self. So while I very much felt good when I was performing and achieving, at my core, there's a lot of shame, a lot of feelings of unworthiness, and a lot of it did factor in terms of how I felt about the vessel that I'm living in with. I mean, I avoided something I'll share really quickly because it has to do with the body. Growing up, I was in all different types of activities, athletics, artistic pursuits, dance here, there, everywhere. And I have a specific memory because all I wanted to do was dance as a kid. I was really interested in dancing. I wanted to be a jazz dancer in particular.
Oh my God, did you really?
Yes.
I had no idea.
So to take
Jazz
jazz dancer, I think probably it would have morphed into hip hop because now I'm like,
There
I
it
feel
is.
that.
Oh my
but
girl.
at the neighborhood dance studio, it was jazz, tap, and ballet offered. Long story short, to get into jazz, you had to take 2 years of ballet, which was not of interest to me. And I was a little girl in the back of the ballet class playing softball at the same time, very much achieving at softball. And I have a memory, you have to wear, or we wore little leotards, and I had a bit of a belly. I now understand that as being a lot of times when we have a lot of cortisol from stress, it can show up in particularly belly weight. But of course, when I was looking at all the other little girls around me, they were all very tiny in their little leotards. And here I was with this belly. And if I'm being perfectly honest, I probably wasn't the best at dance. I was always kind of tucked into the back. And before long, I started to really dislike going to dance, so much so that I would complain, and I ended up quitting dance. I stopped going to dance, I think 2 years in, even though I think in terms of interest and, I think it really was something I probably would have pursued, but I think the self-consciousness of seeing and being in a body that not only didn't compare favorably, I was so uncomfortable in my own skin because of all of the overwhelming stressful feelings that I didn't have support in tending to. I quit dance in favor of being in a softball body where I was able to achieve. I felt better. I got better validation. So interestingly, I think for me, it had a bit of an impact even of shifting me out of possibly pursuing hobbies, passions, things that were of interest to me. And of course, now I'm getting back in my body and dancing around. So that for me is huge.
That's so cool. I love that story so much. And the reason why I really love it is because everything we're talking about, it's like, instead of like, stop beating ourselves up over where we are right now. Like, we are an accumulation of things that have happened in our past. We can't change it. I wish we could, we can't. Until we figure out a DeLorean that we can go back in time, like, Marty McFly. And so instead of beating ourselves up over it, how can we take that as information for us to then be able to, hopefully today, getting your book, changing, really digging into who we are so that we can then show up to have the life we want. And you to sit here to say, look, this all stemmed from the fact that I think I was self-conscious in a leotard. I realized that why I made those decisions. But today, that doesn't sit well with me. And today, I've seen why. And I can change it, and I'm gonna go do that dance class. Girl, I hope people freaking hear that. That is so amazing. And then as you were talking, also I thought once upon a time I would have been like, oh, it's our ego, right? Like our ego doesn't wanna be bruised. But what I freaking love in your book, and literally it stopped me in my tracks. I was like, I'm gonna put that on a Post-it note now, not to villainize our ego. And dude, I do that all the time. It's like, that bitch, like I call my ego my bitch. But I love that you actually said don't villainize it. Talk to me about that. Talk to me about why we do villainize it and then how we can actually turn it into a different message so that we can accept ourselves.
Yeah, so I think clarity a bit on ego, what it is, because I think traditionally, or a lot of us, when we hear ego, we think of that kind of narcissistic, right, self-focused, I'm better than thou, voice or way of being. And really an ego, really simply, as I often simplify things, is the story of us, like who we believe our identity to be, which again, as I'm sure you're not going to be surprised to hear, is grounded in how we've experienced ourselves and the meanings that we've made of our life and our experiences thus far. And again, grounded in our very real lived experience, we all are making meaning all of the time. If we drop in and pay attention to all the swirling thoughts in our mind, we're always trying to make sense of what's happening around us. And when we're younger, in that very early developmental state of dependency, something else that contributes, right, to this beginnings of our ego is the fact that we are developmentally immature, so much that we can't understand all of the nuances and multidimensionality and factors that contribute to anyone's decision. So when things happen in our home, to us, in our relationships, the only way that our developmentally immature mind can make sense of it is egoic or I-based. I must have been the reason that mom left, dad left, that this person's not available to meet my needs, that I was abused. I must be bad, unworthy, wrong. There must be something to do with me. It gives us a bit of control. And again, we don't have the ability to zoom out. We don't have the maturity to be in a relationship and know all of the different factors that contribute to why we do things. Sometimes we don't even know what we do. We can only assume it's us.
Dude, you just, sorry to interrupt you. Holy smoke, that is like a massive aha moment.
Yeah, what's going on, Aisha?
This is so powerful, my God. So like, okay, so if I understand it, you're saying, hey, look, as kids, we just need meaning. Otherwise, it's just utter discomfort. We need to be grounded. So as a kid, you can't put all these things into place. So it's actually a defense mechanism for us to say it's us. That us, that ego, which comes from the Greek word me, I, right? So it's the ego, ego. It just gives me an answer to find some grounding so that I don't feel dysregulated. But it's in that we've now identified it's us that then leads into our adulthood that makes it think it's about us.
Yeah, gives us control too, right?
Yeah,
Because if I can just not be bad in that way, maybe dad will come back. Maybe mom will stay. Maybe I won't get yelled at, screamed at, abused. Right? It gives us that semblance too of understanding, meaning, and control. It gives us something to do about it, right? And then now I can adapt. Now I can change myself.
Right.
Now I can just show, right? For me, seeing a very stressed out household, there was only so much that the LePeras could take. So I felt that. I felt the complete overwhelm all the time. So I started to share less and less about me out of concern that it would stress the system, because that was the experience that I had, right? So I squash part of me. I assume that I'm, the straw that broke the camel's back every time. So if I just limit, and then I became described in my family as shy Nicole, secretive Nicole. Nicole never tells us anything. Nothing ever bothers Nicole. All of that was so far from the truth. But if I feel like I'm causing or contributing at least to this overwhelm that's completely destabilizing me, I can just stop causing it. I can just bring less of me to that table. So back to ego, what then happens over time, because we love to be right, because we also then have a part of our brain that colludes with this whole process called the reticular activating system, that to deal with the seemingly endless amount of stimuli that we just can't physically take in as a human being, we are always filtering and determining what is of personal relevance. And what's of personal relevance are our deep-rooted beliefs, who we think we are. We love to be right and confirm those. So before we know it, outside of our awareness, we delete everything from our existence that challenges our identity. We continue to operate based on this story of who we think we are, right? So I'm nothing bothers Nicole. Not surprising to hear that I became perfect partner Nicole. Never brought an issue, never asked for support in my relationships. I led with that same egoic way of being, and I felt challenged, right? Anytime I tried to operate or share anything out of that. So simply, an ego is a story of us, very much grounded in our lived experiences, often adaptations, how we think we've had to make, or how we've had to make sense of our life without all of the developmental awareness that then gets repeated and filtered, that we get so locked and loaded and sure of who we are into adulthood that, let's bring this full circle, we can become really reactive and defensive if we hear something outside of what we know to be true.
Dude, that is the most powerful way I've ever heard ego expressed. That's amazing. It's all just fit into place. Like every block, as you were saying, I was like, oh my God, it's making a beautiful picture now. And it actually makes me think very differently about the ego, about why we focus on our ego, why it has a villainous thing to it. And actually, it's been our protector.
Right. Yes. It's been trying so hard to serve us, to keep us in that familiar, to keep us knowing ourselves in the way that we become comfortable. And anything outside of that, any perspective that doesn't match, this is again where we can get heated arguments with loved ones, even very well-meaning ones, who point out the shadow sides of us, the things that are harder for us to see, right? And or when we hear people who express beliefs outside of our own beliefs, we can become really reactive and squash, because the reason being, again, going back to this, what feels like disproportionate reactions in those moments actually aren't disproportionate, right? There are safety-making mechanisms. We feel challenged, threatened when we're having a new experience or hearing something new about ourselves. And if I've only come to identify but with that very egoic story or who I think I am, now I'm going to be really challenged anytime I hear those alternate perspectives. And I'm not going to want to let this new information in, because then I've become unfamiliar to even myself.
Now you're challenging everything that I think of, and that challenge now becomes extremely uncomfortable.
Yes. Now I have no option but to take it personally, because what I feel is happening is a very personal attack. But we have to understand, so not to villainize it means observing it, seeing these stories, seeing how we're coloring our experiences with possibly this reactivity, and expanding the space to acknowledge all of the rest of us. Everything that maybe didn't have space or safety in our childhood to express, everything that maybe I've shut down about myself to at one point keep myself connected and safe, that's still part of us. So the goal of ego work in general is to acknowledge that I've yet to meet a human who doesn't have an ego, who's not doing some of this subconscious filtering and biasing and reacting when it's kind of outside of our familiar bounds of self, to acknowledge that maybe in those moments we are feeling a bit threatened, and then over time being able to expand and allowing in the rest of our being that probably has been just pushed below the surface.
I love that. And you also say like name your ego, Jessica.
That's right. I think it can be really, really helpful. And that's like a silly way to play with it, but to create that separation, right? If I can, the ego isn't, it's a part of my story. It's been a very validated part of my story that, again, has kept me safely protected as the overachiever without needs, because that's who I had to be. So thank you, Jessica, for your service. And I think sometimes acknowledging when that voice is active by calling it Jessica's voice can be the beginning of that separation. Jessica is part of my story, has played a protective role in my story, but Jessica isn't who Nicole is. There's much more to Nicole. So I invite anyone listening to not only observe their ego, anytime we think anytime we're having thoughts that are very much kind of about me, who I think I am, what my place is in the world, pay attention to how repetitive and habitual those stories are. That might be the voice of that ego. And if you would like to give your ego a name, again, I think that can help create that separation, maybe even add a bit of humor, which I think helps on all of our journeys. When the ego comes alive, you can acknowledge, oh, Jessica,
That's what I really like about it. And obviously, people have talked about like alter egos, but I've never really thought about it in this realm as a way to help yourself get over triggers, get over emotional issues, get over trauma. Like I've never really thought of, I've always thought of like, alter ego, like Sasha Fierce,
yes,
right?
Yes.
It's like, and it's like me with my hair. It's like, I don't always have my hair like this, but it's my way of showing up. But I've never thought of ego as being like that. Like when you have something that maybe stings or maybe it shows up, to just say, oh, it's Jessica. Like having that kind of like your mate where it's like, oh, it's her, but it doesn't mean that it's me. Because I think when we think of it as being, this is who I am, it can like really like create knots. I mean, explain to me actually what that's doing to us.
I think what you're describing is that constriction, is limitation. Right, it's kind of shrinking in. I mean, when we've defined who we are, we don't really give us any other option to have any other experience of ourselves. I think egos, identities, to some extent, largely can be limiting if we make that our whole story. And the reality is, and I think it's a tough reality for most of us living this human experience, is that we are multidimensional. There isn't just one way to kind of summarize or put in a bucket or put a hat on what I am even, right? There's so much of what I am. And I can even make a case that there's an evolution of what I am in and of myself. So when we embrace that multidimensionality, I think then we allow ourselves that space. But so few of us do that. We become constricted. We kind of even feel ourselves tense inside. And I could even go as far to say that some of us inhabit then the role of, and this is where we can talk about, and actually the next book that I'm working on relationships is going to talk a lot about what I call conditioned selves, when this idea of ego actually morphs into this whole embodied function role I play, where I become, right, the caretaker in a relationship, where my whole sense of self is based on this idea of that's all I am. I'm a person who provides care. My neurobiology shifts, and I embody that actual self. So I can make a statement that ego, right, becomes the cloud that some of us can become the weather of. And we limit ourselves that we can't even imagine stepping outside of our roles, let alone our stories.
Wow, girl, that's so strong. You mentioned, and I didn't want to interrupt you, our shadow selves. So how in everything that we're talking about, can we identify what our shadow selves are? If you actually don't mind explaining what that is, let's start there.
Yes, so our shadow is all of the repressed, which means kept out of our awareness, aspects of ourselves. So if in childhood, again, we didn't have the space to be sad, be angry, maybe just self-express our creativity or just be who we are, the more consistently we got a message, direct or indirect, not to do that, that those things don't go away. Emotions don't go away. That aspect of ourself doesn't go away. It might go out of our conscious awareness. And then we call that it's repressed in our shadow, if you will. Think of like the shadow that's cast. We can't see it necessarily. Where we do experience our shadow often is sometimes when we have, this is very interesting. It's funny that I brought that dance story. I imagine this is why. I didn't know you were going to go to shadow, but what I would notice when good old Instagram came to be, the dancing app as it was began, you can imagine where I'm going here, scrolling Instagram, seeing people dance freely, that constriction you just felt, I would almost seethe inside. I would feel my body clench, and I might even think some negative, critical things about the dancer. Not, oh wow, look at this beautiful dancer in full self-expression, how nice, what a thing that my little self would have wanted. So repressed, all of that, that what I saw in that freedom of self-expression, that ease in the body that at least communicates to me when I see someone dancing, all of that aspect of myself was so pushed outside of my awareness. The desire to be free and at ease in my body was projected, is what we call it, and came out as irritation, negative reaction at something I see in someone else. Understanding that the shadow of it, right, was in me. I didn't see it in myself. The ability to be easeful, free, connected to one's body, I saw it in that person and I had a negative reaction. So that's a lot of times where we can see our shadow reflected when we are turned off by certain aspects of another person is a really great place to wonder within. Seeing if there's an aspect of ourself, because I can make a case that we all have aspects of everyone inside of us. You know, I mean, there's certain times where we're all a little bit of something in different moments. So when we have those big visceral reactions can be an indicator. And it isn't always negative things that we're repressing, right? Some of us might have learned to repress even our ability to shine, talents that we've had. If there wasn't space or if that wasn't rewarded, maybe in the traditional sense, our parents didn't think that that was going to get us the good paying job that they wanted. It could be some of our natural gifts and talents that we've squashed below the surface. Again, all because of the messaging that we got. Doesn't mean it's not in us. Oftentimes it's activated when we see it in someone else, and usually it's unfavorable how we're feeling, because when it really comes down to it, we don't like that part of ourselves.
Oh, and so do you think that we should start, I mean, yes, you have a workbook, so I'm sure your answer's gonna be yes, but like starting to take inventory, because as you were talking, it's like, how do you actually start to identify your shadow self? Obviously you said, you know, when you're starting to get that uncomfortable, maybe that negative, like that could be a sign. Is that where people should start? Like if someone's just starting right now and they're like, oh, I don't recognize that I'm showing up like that. I actually do believe I really hate this dance and I really hate that, you know, the shoes that woman's wearing or whatever. But a lot of the time there's that deep-rooted thing, right? So what would you suggest? Yeah, would it be inventory, then backtracking? What would that look like?
Yeah, paying attention. I think anytime, I'm going to answer this really globally, anytime we're having a feeling, we can get really curious and begin to explore what's causing it. So whether it's the negative reaction to the Instagram post that you're seeing, the negative reaction to the comment that your partner made, right? Feelings are meant to provide us information. If we can learn, right, how to, in a grounded way, see them, allow them in, I should say first, and allow them to not dysregulate us so that they can be part of our experience, but not color our experience and overwhelm us and send us back into that cycle of reactivity. But when we can, you know, negotiate life with emotions, then I think any time we have an emotion that's activated, especially a big one, can give us an opportunity to then explore and then getting really honest. Okay, well, what is it? What am I reacting to? What is it about those shoes? What is my mind telling myself about the person who wears those shoes maybe? Oh, well, that's a person who would X, Y, or Z. And oh, that's something that I don't want to be about. Oh, okay, well, can I see any moments where I am X, Y, or Z, or where I too act on X, Y, or Z, right? That's just a little bit of a quick way of doing that backtracking. But start with any feelings. Feelings are information. The more consistently we have feelings, the bigger the feelings are, we can explore. Again, what is the meaning I'm making? What is my mind telling me about the person who's wearing or doing this thing? And if I'm really honest, can I locate a place in time where I see that in me? And can I work to allow that to be okay?
That is so beautiful. And you said this earlier, but I want to repeat it because it fits so perfectly here as well, is that once you start to understand everything you're saying, once you start to practice it yourself, you can now actually see it in other people and I think have more understanding. So when someone is coming to you having this, you know, heightened reaction, if you've already done the work and you're like, oh, this may be their shadow self, what am I doing? Like, I try to be as empathetic as I possibly can. And look, we're on social, so we probably open ourselves up a lot more than other people. But when you get pushback, hate, negative comments, whether it's on social or even within your own family, I try to then put on my empathetic hat. And now you're giving me words to be able to use, because I normally say, oh, I've probably triggered them. How did I trigger them? Like, I kind of just go to that because I'm like, what? Because I wore my hair like this, all of a sudden they're freaking out. Like, what the hell did I do? And so I go, okay, it's a trigger. But now being able to use the shadow self is actually really beautiful language to be able to say, like, what is in their shadow self and maybe they've squished that I'm triggering that to now rear its head.
Yeah, what you're describing really beautifully, Lisa, is what I call depersonalizing, right? Learning to pull back and have that inquiry and see, you know, the moments where it could be about us. And this is where I say, you know, having that nuance, that discretion, you know, maybe not believing strangers on the internet who never met you, but maybe do listening to those close loved ones that you know have your best interest and might offer you that vantage point that we were talking about earlier. And in the moments, again, where it is a heightened reaction, it is a reaction or someone's making an assessment about you that they couldn't possibly know to be true because they don't know you, then you could kind of pull back and understand things and explore things from that vantage point, from a less personal. Yeah, they're saying and reacting to my words, my appearance, my way of being, or whatever it is, but for them, it's coming from a deeper place. I don't even have to invalidate, nor would I want to. Their feeling is very real. They're having a very real emotional reaction, though it might not be to me in particular, right? Just like I project similar, like we've been talking about this whole conversation, right? There might be a similarity or a meaning that they've made over what they think they see or how they're perceiving or subjectively hearing what I'm saying or subjectively seeing how I'm presenting that, again, is very similar to something that they've lived, not invalidating what their feelings and, of course, creating boundaries so I can safely allow them to have their feeling while I'm safely over here. But that's essentially the process of depersonalizing. I can understand it from a less personal perspective than I was able to in childhood.
Yeah, I love that. Dude, as you were talking, I was like, all right, let's just go masterclass on this interview right now. So everything you're saying, once we do the work, you even said, like, when there are people around you that you can really trust, that's obviously very important to feel safe around you, for someone to be able to maybe help you through things or point something out. What the hell do you do if there's someone that you very much trust, they've proven time and time again that they absolutely have your back, that they love you more than life itself, that they want good things for you, but their advice and feedback is all coming from their shadow self?
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting question. In terms of understanding, of course, the more we know about someone, right, the more then we could have even like this statement, oh, I can see where this is ultimately coming from. I mean, we have choice, we can hear, we can listen. Ultimately, what we do on someone's feedback, on someone's perception, on someone's perspective is up to us. And I just want to emphasize this because most of us as humans, all of us as humans, we want to be heard. We want our perspective to be taken into consideration. We want to know we matter. We want to know that, you know, if we are sharing our perspective, even if it's coming from our shadow self with a loved one, that it's not landing on deaf ears or being argued. So there's a way, I believe, to sensitively hear and listen, though ultimately it is our choice what we do with the information. So then having that moment where we can hear and graciously thank someone for their feedback, their perspective. You know, we may not be able to convince them where it is coming from, even if we do have that vantage point of coming from the shadow, because ultimately we can offer it. It's up to them to choose it. So just as much we can hear their feedback, we then go and I kind of have a visual feedback from anywhere that we can receive it from someone's shadow, well-meaning or not, and decide for ourselves. And I believe that needs to be part of the discretion, the developing of discretion journey of humans, is to have that moment in time, have that listen, not argue, not even try to convince someone that it's coming from our shadow, because if they're not willing to hear it, They're not going to be open to us being blue in the face, screaming and yelling or arguing it so we can receive that information. Thank you for sharing your perspective. And then we could take that to our home base. We can then go observe ourselves and see if we see from their perspective what they mean. And ultimately we get to choose, because it might not be for us. It might not be about us. It might never have been. And then we can have that choice. They feel heard. We feel empowered to continue on in the way that we know aligns with us.
Oh, I love that so much. And how much then, because you talk about heart consciousness, which I love. I'd never heard that before. So talk to me about heart consciousness and how this also plays in relationships when you have these moments where you have to go in and really listen to yourself and not necessarily take your partner or a friend's thoughts and advice as fact.
Yeah, so our heart is, we are now finding out very scientifically how incredibly powerful our heart is. I mean, there's so much about the human body from the shoulders down that it is so incredibly powerful and so full of wisdom, from our gut, where we have those gut instincts, to our heart. We now know that our heart actually submits an electromagnetic field that's even more powerful than our brain. It's usually measured in how many feet away you can kind of feel the vibration or the frequency of our heart or our brain producing. And our heart, I think it's somewhere around 6 feet around us, can influence. So if there was electrodes, say in a glass of water, my heartbeat would be able to, if it's within that 6 feet, I mean, don't quote me, I could be wrong on the exact numbers, but I think it's around 6 feet of our body, you would pick up my heart frequency more so than my brain frequency in that glass of water. So our heart is not only communicating signals to the external environment, it's communicating signals to our brain. Our heart actually plays a big role in coordinating activity. We used to give our brain all of the credit. Our brain was everything. And our brain is very, very powerful. But again, so is our gut and so is our heart. And just as much as our brain is sending information down, our heart is sending so much coordination of not only physiological but emotional messaging up to our brain. So as far as I'm concerned, our heart is the location of that intuition, that essence, right? That kind of indescribable sensation or compass or guidance system that we're all looking for. And because so few of us are paying actually attention to our heart, not only, again, is it our interface for our environment, giving us information about how we're experiencing it, in my opinion, like I said, it is really a vessel of what makes us us. I mean, I've read fascinating stories of, I don't know if you've gone down the rabbit hole of any heart transplant, or there's incredible stories of heart transplant stories where hearts of, individuals who have passed get obviously implanted into a living individual. And to the surprise, I think, of everyone involved, not only memories, taste, preferences begin to become evident with this idea that our heart actually has like memories that's stored in it. So our heart is incredibly fascinating. Again, very few of us, I think, for the point of this conversation, we're not connected to our heart. Or if we have those, again, instincts, sensations, because our heart doesn't speak in our thinking mind and the repetitive stories, it's sensations, it's kind of, I can't think of the word, little indications, aha, light bulbs, kind of things that seemingly plop into our, conscious awareness seemingly out of nowhere. All of that is more of the language, it's body-based, is the point I'm trying to make, of our intuition. And if we're paying attention to our mind, if we're not even attuned to our heart, or if we are and we feel like we know what our heart wants, but we override it based on what we think we should do, or what we were taught to do, or a million other reasons we convince ourselves out of doing those things. And I'm of the belief that the more, again, we drop into our body, the more we learn how to reintegrate or reconnect with our heart, and then attune to its messages, because again, it's much more on a sensory system. We have to learn to hear, even the way you describe, I feel that kind of constriction, right? That's coming from somewhere deeper within. So learning to pay attention to those signals will, in my opinion, give us that guidance that we're looking for, giving us the moments of saying, well, wait a minute, what does my heart say about this? What does my heart want to do? And the more, of course, we can align our actions with that heart space, the more then we're allowing our intuition to guide us.
That's amazing. But what about so, like in relationships, so many people are just like, oh, well, don't just follow your heart. Like, your heart's going to lead you astray because it's like it wants something. So maybe, the messaging that I've heard is your heart so wants to, let's say, be with somebody that it will be blind to certain things. People blame the heart for that. Do you agree with that?
I would question whether or not they're following their heart or their familiar relationship pattern in those moments, right? Because I think to really attune to our heart, it's again learning how to drop in. And I think a lot of times what we're attracted to in relationships, or what we think we're gravitating toward, or is coming again from that instinctive place, is more maybe coming from the familiarity of that dynamic than from the deeper heart space.
So when people would say, let's say, or the phrase, it's a broken heart, do you feel like that is actually the heart that's broken, or that it's our perception of what this means about us, let's say stemming from a child where when we were dismissed or someone's left me, my heart breaks, but really makes me feel like I'm no good, I'm not worthy.
Yes. And that produces a feeling in our heart too. So it's both and. Again, our heart is very much a conductor of our emotions. Our heart goes in and out of what's called coherence based on the emotion we're feeling. When we're feeling compassion, when we're feeling connection, when we're feeling love, it's described as we're in heart coherence. The rhythm of our heart actually changes when we're feeling anger, when we're feeling hurt, when we're feeling sadness. We actually did a podcast episode, Jen and I, on heartbreak and how very much it's in the body, and it does map onto pain and a shift in our heart's rhythm. So it's it's what happened in childhood, maybe it's similarity or lack thereof in what's happening now. It's still very real, producing very real feelings, which we can actually feel sometimes in our physical heart space, where it does feel like it's breaking. And it maps onto a physiological change in rhythm in terms of coherence versus incoherence.
That's fascinating.
It's really fascinating.
Oh
I'm fascinated by the heart.
That's incredible. And, even in the book where you take people through, like put your hand on your heart, take these deep breaths. So as I was listening to it on Audible, but like as I was doing it, I was putting my hand on my heart. You were coaching me through it. And as I was doing it, I was like, I don't remember the last time I put my hand on my heart. Yeah. I don't know the last time that I thought about my heart.
Right.
And as you were talking, also the time that most recently sticks with is when my puppy passed away, my dog. He was 17, he was the Tom and I's baby. And I remember when he died, all I could do was put my hand on my heart and go, my heart's broken. I was like, my heart hurts. And I just kept repeating to Tom, like, my heart hurts. I don't know why I'm getting all emotional. Wow. And I don't remember the last time I ever felt like my heart hurt. And it was like I was like putting my hand on my heart and just like trying to protect it. I've never done that before.
Yeah, I have memories in childhood. One of the most visceral memories I have is laying in bed at night, and it would usually come around a recurring nightmare that I would have, and I would wake up from this nightmare, and the pressure, it would feel like someone was putting their hand straight through my heart space. And I never had language and knew what it was, and obviously now looking back, I believe it was a broken heart of not having, for me, that connection with really anyone in my family, feeling so deeply alone, and that I remember very viscerally in childhood. I can almost call to mind what it was to feel that, and it was in my heart space. And then as I grew, interestingly, my posture even, for a very long time, my mom would be like, stand up straight. Don't you like being tall? And, I would roll my eyes at her as, oftentimes an adolescent, a teenager does, like, oh, Mom, And again, I now view it through the lens of I was protecting this whole kind of hunched posture, as least the sense I've made of it, was coming from quite literally a broken heart of no fault of my mom or my family's own, of their inability of themselves to even be connected to themselves, let alone me, of a broken heart. And then my whole postural, right, protection that then translated to this distance in relationships, never acting like I had feelings, because I was never going to let my heart be broken again. And it was then, again, that visceral feeling in the heart that I can even recollect now of like, almost like takes my breath away feeling.
This romantic gesture is actually a major red flag. Click here right now and find out why.
You're not really that important to them at all when it comes to sex, apart from you're an achievement. And that can be very confusing for people because they think, oh my God, I've just met the most charming person.